Hello, and welcome to the Yankees Seasons Podcast, Episode 1, Introductions. Hello, and first off, thank you for tuning into the first episode of the Yankees Seasons Podcast. If you're listening in your car, eyes on the road. If you're at work, try to look busy. And if you're just listening to check it out, thank you. I'm both thankful and humbled. My name's Jonathan, and I'm the host of this podcast. I thought we would take some time to just go over some introductory items, what my hopes for the show are, who the heck I am, and then start introducing the team and the season we're going to be studying for this. If this were a college course, think of today's episode as syllabus week. Before we dive in, first things first. What is this thing and where did the idea come from? I was driving on my commute to work and discovered old radio broadcasts of World Series games, specifically the 1936 series between the Yankees and the New York Giants. I'm both an avid Yankees fan and history fan, and was wishing there was a podcast that felt similar in nature to Ken Burns' baseball documentary, or for fans of history podcasts, something like Mike Duncan's The History of Rome. But instead of analyzing the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, one that specifically broke down a season of the New York Yankees, the winning streaks, the losing streaks, the incredible games, the drama. Something that captured the characters on the field and off. Not some 10 to 15 minute synopsis of the entire season, but a deep dive that really examined the season as a narrative, week by week, series by series, game by game, to not just see the whole picture, but to almost experience the season as it happened. I sent out a feeler email to Brian Richards, Senior Museum Curator for the Yankee Museum at Yankee Stadium, that was at both times looking for research, but also seeing if this was something that had been done before, but I was just missing. To his knowledge and mine, no other projects were out there that specifically broke down the season I'm choosing to start with, the 1956 season, so it was off to the races, and the research began. You might be asking yourself, why 1956? Obviously, a team like the New York Yankees has more than one season that deserves this level of reflection, many more than one. And there were several years that stood out when I was initially rolling ideas around the old noggin. 1936, for example, the World Series that started the whole process, was originally the season I was planning to choose. My personal favorite player is Lou Gehrig, so having him in the lineup is a plus. Having Joe DiMaggio's rookie season, both of these definitely helped pique my interest. 1927, and the famous Murderer's Row also stuck out and seemed like a juicy starting point. For the sake of sources and having the forethought of knowing it would be few and far between finding any sort of video or radio broadcast for those years, the 1998 season and their 114-48 record, the fact that there would be plenty of sources available, and the fact that they were a team full of childhood heroes also almost etched its way into being the season that would have been broken down in the following episodes. All of those are great seasons, and hey, if this goes well, maybe I'll circle back and make more seasons of this podcast that cover those years too. But for now, I've settled on 1956. No spoilers, but getting to research Mickey Mantle's best year, discussing legends like Whitey Ford and Yogi Berra, and all of it building to probably the greatest game ever pitched, 1956 has been a blast exploring on the research side, and should be a fun year to examine here in this podcast, and I hope you enjoy the ride. So you might also be wondering, who am I? Like I said earlier, my name's Jonathan. I've been a Yankees fan for as long as I can remember, thanks to equal parts Backyard Baseball 2001, and a biography on Lou Gehrig from my school's library I read as a kid, but I'm not a native New Yorker, and the Yankees were a found team for me. I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where the local team was the Fort Wayne Wizards, now Tin Caps. And don't get me wrong, I loved going to the games, but they were a single-A affiliate for the San Diego Padres. I was in Indiana. There was no way I was going to be able to watch Padres games on TV. I don't think I could have even told you where San Diego was as a 10-year-old. But the Yankees? They were on ESPN or Fox what seemed like once a week. My first game at Yankee Stadium was in May 2005, and it was like a drug. I've been hooked ever since. The green grass, the monuments in the light of Monument Park, and the fact that I lucked out on the rotation and got to see Randy Johnson in pinstripes in person. I needed the jerseys, the baseball cards, the famous Yankee cap, all of it. For the historical analysis side, I have a master's degree in history from DePaul University in Chicago, and this podcast spun out of a love for my team, but also a desperate attempt to find a use for my degree. I'd also like to take a second to break down the goals for the style of the podcast and the source base before we start introducing the team. As far as style is concerned, I plan on this being a narrative-based, chronological breakdown and exploration of the 56 season. I'm going to do my best not to spoil anything, to only look back and not discuss things with the benefit of hindsight. I'm aware that at any point you could look up things like who was the first team the Yankees saw at the start of the season, or how many wins did the team end up with, who were the starters, etc. I suppose there's no real reason not to do that, other than where's the fun in that? I'm hoping to create some natural drama that comes with following a team as the season unfolds when outcomes aren't already known. I'm sure that it's obvious for those that don't already know that the Yankees more than likely won the World Series in 1956. I'm not throwing y'all for a loop and covering a team like the 91 Yankees where you listen to 30-odd hours of material just for the season to end up with the team in last place. While the outcome of the season may be obvious, I hope to refrain from any other spoilers as we walk our way through the summer of 1956. As for the source base for this project, in general, I'd like to shout out the Society for American Baseball Research. They have a subscription base that I cannot recommend enough that comes with access to pretty much anything that you could want. Along with that, there are some radio broadcasts available of the World Series of 56, so whenever we get to October, I'll try to include a link somewhere you can listen to the games if you'd like. Game 5 might be of particular interest. Sorry, no spoilers there. At the time, radio broadcasts were done through the WINS station on AM 1010 with the voices of Mel Allen, Jim Woods, and the man who left the Brooklyn Dodgers to announce the Yankees, Red Barber. Television broadcasts were also available throughout the year through WPIX, who held the rights to Yankee games from 1951 to 1998. Mel Allen and Red Barber split radio and TV duties throughout the 1956 season, but unfortunately, from what I've seen, those games aren't available anywhere. A majority of any such recordings are really limited just to the World Series, so anything for the regular season appears to be lost. There are a multitude of newspapers that I've used for research, as newspapers were the main source of news at the time. The work of John Drebinger at the New York Times, for example, has been a wonderful source of material for this. He was a full-time baseball writer by 1928 and wrote for the Times until 1964. He served as a chairman of the New York chapter of Baseball Writers Association of America, and by all counts, by 1956, he was the baseball writer for both the Times and for New York. I also have to give a public shout-out to author Marty Appel, who has numerous books on the Yankees, but his book on Casey Stengel, Baseball Greatest Character, and his broader analysis of the team, Pinstripe Empire, really helped serve as the jumping-off point for research. Randy Roberts and Johnny Smith's A Season in the Sun, The Rise of Mickey Mantle was also a cornerstone of literature and research both on the period and on one of the main themes of the season, just as the title mentions, The Rise of Mickey Mantle. Magazines like Sports Illustrated, Newsweek, Time, Life, etc. also feature the team, and I've gone through all of them. I'll include a full bibliography along with episodes and continue to mention where quotes or other citations come from so you can go out and buy copies for yourself. Okay. That should be it for just about all of the more procedural busy work. I plan on breaking down the team position by position and get started with spring training next episode, but I'd like to take the rest of this episode just building up to the 56 season. Who were the Yankees by February of 1956 when the pitchers and catchers were set to report to spring training? Who was their coach? What was their philosophy? How had the past couple of seasons gone? These are questions I'd like to answer before we wrap up today. By 1956, the New York Yankees were already the capital T New York Yankees. This was largely in part of the work of legends Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig, who had called it quits just 17 years prior. Ruth had turned the Yankees into a phenomenon, and the torch was carried by Gehrig and then followed up by the Yankees clipper, Joltin' Joe DiMaggio. The Yankees' reputation, as much credit as there was to give to the players, was also undoubtedly due to the longtime manager Joe McCarthy, who in his tenure would win 7 World Series titles and 8 American League pennants just between 1932 and 43. It was under McCarthy that there began a sense of what it meant to be a Yankee. You weren't just a baseball player, you were a Yankee. It comes with its own set of rules, the standards of a champion expected to act as such at all times, and at least for that decade, he had the merits and success to warrant the sentiment. He managed the Yankees until 1946 when he signed over his resignation in the middle of the season. His last 2 full seasons weren't up to his standards or the standards of the ball club, ending up a whopping 10 games over 500 in 1945 and 12 games over 500 in 1944. Guess it wasn't enough. The Yankees settled on Bucky Harris to take over the management duties in 1947, and he was with the team just another year after that in 1948. The Yankees won the World Series under Harris' control in 1947, but fell to 3rd place in 48. Then Yankees owner Larry MacPhail, who was not in control all that long to begin with, resigned as owner after the victory in 1947, and the now sole owners Dan Topping and Del Webb, as well as their general manager George Weiss, weren't content with 3rd place in their first season as owners of the team. More on George Weiss shortly. So Bucky Harris is out after 2 seasons. What I just referred to with Larry MacPhail is also crucial in understanding how we get to Casey Stengel. Stengel had been floating around in the discussion of managing the Yankees since the early 40s. He was someone that George Weiss really wanted, but with his managerial record, MacPhail blocked it every time it was brought up. However, with MacPhail selling off to Topping and Webb in 1947, Weiss would have a new opportunity to pitch Stengel as their man. After pushing for Casey Stengel, he was officially introduced as the Yankees manager on October 12, 1948. He would have a lot to overcome, namely his reputation as a class clown and the fact that the highest position in the standings a team he had ever managed finished was 5th out of 8, and that was the only team that had a record over 500. It was the 77 and 75 Boston Bees, soon to be the Braves, in 1938. The last team he managed where he held control the entire season was the 1942 Boston Braves with a .399 winning percentage. They were 59 and 89, and as the 7th place finishers, only stuck it out ahead of the Philadelphia Phils in their 42 and 109 record. As far as Weiss was concerned, though, Stengel was their man. The press might have needed some convincing, but Joe DiMaggio showed up at Stengel's announcement as a vote of confidence from the team. What followed was a run that has never been repeated in baseball history. The Yankees won the World Series in 1949 against the Brooklyn Dodgers. They won again in 1950 for the repeat, this time sweeping the Philadelphia Phillies. In 1951, they won their 3rd World Series in a row, winning 4-2 over the New York Giants. In 1952, facing the Dodgers, they would win 4-3, and it would be the 3rd time they beat the Dodgers in the World Series in the last 6 years. With 4 championships in a row, Stengel tied the record set by McCarthy for most consecutive championships. But like I mentioned earlier, he was taking the Yankees on a run they had never been on, and no team has accomplished since. The 1953 series featured the Yankees and their familiar foe, the Brooklyn Dodgers. Winning the series 4-2, Stengel and the New York Yankees claimed their 5th championship in a row. The bet on Casey Stengel, the old professor, had paid off massively for George Weiss. Okay, George Weiss, let's get into it. When I said earlier that Joe McCarthy had been a principal player in turning the Yankees into the Yankees, the work he did as coach and manager of the club would work in tandem with Weiss's work. Weiss started with the club all the way back in 1932 when Jacob Ruppert, owner of the team, the same owner that bought Babe Ruth's contract from the Red Sox and turned him into a Yankee, the same owner that constructed the original Yankee Stadium which opened in '23, that Jacob Ruppert, hired Weiss to create a new farm system of minor league clubs that would feed talent into the major league team. The idea for farm systems was not new. Branch Rickey, who took over the St. Louis Cardinals in 1917 as general manager, had employed a similar system almost right when he started. Before then, your talented players came from minor league teams that you would offer a contract to and hope they didn't get signed to another club before you could get to them. The farm system made them your players from the beginning. They would climb their way up the minor league ladder until they were ready for the big leagues. When Ruppert and then general manager Ed Barrow hired Weiss to build the farm system in 1932, it could have been because they saw the success of the Cardinals beginning to pay off and they wanted to maintain their championship dominance, but more than likely, it was built out of a necessity to save money during the peak of the Great Depression. Ticket sales were plummeting as the years of the Depression rolled through, when instead they could sign players to smaller contracts earlier in their career and mold them into champions. Weiss would head the farm system until the team was bought in 1945 and he was named general manager. Was his farm system successful? Players like Vic Raschi, Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford, Hank Bauer, Phil Rizzuto, and Mickey Mantle all climbed their ways through that farm system. The winning streak of 49-53, 5 straight World Series titles, all won by direct results of the farm system that Weiss had implemented, wasn't just a fluke. When Weiss first started the system and got it off the ground, there was another streak. This time, McCarthy's 4 titles in a row from 36 to 39. For the sake of our podcast, tracking the success of the team from the time Weiss began in 1932 until 1956, the year we will spend all our time studying, the Yankees won 13 World Series titles and 15 pennants. By 1956, the New York Yankees were a well-oiled machine of champions, where winning the pennant and then the World Series was not just the expectation, but seen as a predestined outcome. No one asked, will the Yankees win it this year? They asked, how many games will it take before the Yankee players are covered in champagne? Of their 13 championships in that time frame, 32 to 55, only 2 series made it to 7 games. 4 of those titles were sweeps, 32, 38, 39, and 50. Another 4 of those titles the Yankees won after only losing 1 game, 37, 41, 43, and 49. I suppose it doesn't matter, but it should illustrate that yes, the Yankees were dominant through the 30s, 40s, and 50s because they won so many times, but knowing just how dominant they were, how few games they were losing, paints a more clear picture and better sets up the more immediate past for the team going into 1956. That short-term memory, what happened after their streak, was what had to be stuck if not burned, into their minds by the time spring began in 1956. The 1954 Yankees looked amazing. They won 103 games, something they hadn't done since 1942. They hadn't won more single-season games than that since the 1939 season when they won 106. But even their 103 wins in 1949 was not enough to win the American League pennant. The Cleveland Indians had bested them by 8 games with a record of 111-43, a .721 winning percentage, which is still to this day the 5th best winning percentage of any team in any year in all of the MLB. They wouldn't be able to get past the New York Giants in the World Series, though. They were swept in 4 games. Yogi Berra would win the American League MVP that year, despite Cleveland's record, winning over Cleveland players Larry Doby and Bobby Avila. In 1955, it was the Yankees on top of the American League, winning the pennant with 96 wins ahead of Cleveland's 93. Yogi Berra would go back-to-back with MVP awards, winning it for the 3rd time total. At the end of the year, squaring off against them in the Fall Classic would be their usual opponents, the Brooklyn Dodgers. It would be the 5th time the two teams faced off against each other in 9 years. The Yankees winning all 4 previous bouts in that time, in their earlier face-off in 1941, making it 5-0 total for the Yankees. In Game 7, the Yankees were unable to stick it to Johnny Padres, and the Dodgers won their first and only title while in Brooklyn. Mickey Mantle had suffered an injury and was unable to play the full series. Padres would win MVP with his complete game wins in both Games 3 and 7. For the Yankees, this was their first World Series loss since 1942. Dem Bums had done it. They were the best team in the world, but more importantly, they were the best team in New York. The Yankees won 5 in a row, and they hadn't won since. Adding insult to injury, the past 2 winners were the Giants, and then the Dodgers. The Yankees were watching World Series parades in New York, knowing it wasn't for them. They had to find a way to get back on top. So wrapping up that extremely brief summarization of the Yankees' state of affairs going into 1956, I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about the team. Who were they? In the same way that a team has an identity that changes as the players and managers do, who were these Yankees? The Golden State Warriors with Curry have been different than any iteration of the Warriors before him. Even teams with highly decorated pasts have been molded, morphed, and evolved over time. The Lakers, made up of Magic and Kareem, were drastically different than that of Shaq and Kobe. The Yankees, too, had their own iterations come and go. I touched on the transition of the Babe to Gehrig to DiMaggio earlier, and now that baton was being passed to a younger generation, not just in the batter's box with the likes of Mickey Mantle, but also in their pitching. Stengel's pitching staff was also going through their own reshaping. The veterans, Eddie Lopat and Allie Reynolds, by 56, were both gone. Lopat was traded to Baltimore in the middle of 55, and it would be his last season. Reynolds retired the year before that, at the end of the 1954 season. The two of them had been with the Yankees for Stengel's entire tenure to this point, and from 1948 to 1954, they had won a combined 221 games. Stengel was moving pieces around trying to figure out what his pitching staff would look like and give the younger players like Johnny Cucks, Bob Turley, and Rip Coleman some opportunities to win regular spots in rotation. Stengel gave Whitey Ford, the 27-year-old ace, his nickname chairman of the board, to usher in this new era of Yankee pitching. Ford had pitched since 1950, although he would miss 51 and 52 due to military service. He quickly established himself, though, as one of the most dominant pitchers when he got back, going 52 and 21 from 53 to 55 with an ERA of just .280. There was no one on the field that gave more stability both to Stengel's lineup but also his mental state than his catcher, the 3-time winning and twice reigning American League MVP, Yogi Berra. Heading into the 56 season, Berra had 9 full seasons in the majors under his belt. He finished in the top 3 of MVP voting in more than half of them. From 1950 to 55, he played catcher in more games than anyone else in the league every season. He led the league in putouts as a catcher every season in that time but 53, when he got second. He led the league in caught stealing in 50, 51, and 52, and finished second in 54 and 55. I know I don't have to convince you Yogi Berra was good. He is still a household name to this day. And if you said, yeah, but the cartoon is why, stop right there and ask yourself why even he was named Yogi Berra. The man was a machine behind the plate, and in the batter's box, it was no different. In his entire career before 1956, he bat .294 with 4,505 total at-bats, where he had only struck out 199 times. He had 208 home runs in that time, meaning if you were pitching to Yogi Berra in 1956, you were more likely to have one hit over the fence than to get him to strike out. Stengel would also rely on the usage of Hank Bauer in right field. Bauer was moved around the outfield at the beginning of his career from 48 to 51, but since 1952 he had played over 100 games in the right field every year. However, the same couldn't be said of left field. Gene Woodling had occupied left field from 50 to 54, but was a piece in a major shakeup trade that brought Bob Turley, Don Larson, and Billy Hunter to the Yankees. Irv Noren was the man who'd stepped up in Woodling's absence in 1955 to play left field, but going into the 56 season, there was a question mark as to who would be starting at left come opening day. I think most would agree, though, it wasn't the question mark around left field that had the attention of sports writers. Phil Rizzuto was 38 in 1956. He had been with the Yankees since 1941 and had already shown signs of decline. In 54, Rizzuto bat only 195 in 127 games. The next year, he only played 81 games. Stengel knew Rizzuto's days at shortstop were numbered, and he better have a plan for the lineup without him. Billy Hunter, one of the players acquired in the Woodling trade, had filled in at shortstop when Rizzuto wasn't playing in 55. Hunter racked up 98 appearances at short, but in that time he had hit .227 with an OPS of .567, the lowest in the lineup that year. So Stengel definitely wanted to find a solution to the shortstop problem before the 56 season officially kicked off and would use spring training to try different combinations. Trying combinations was indeed Stengel's forte. Casey Stengel, despite his track record before the Yankees' success, had always been known to use platoon players in his lineup. Truly, Stengel is one of the managers known for pioneering the use of these players in two major ways. First, he loved players that showed utility. They were infielders, not just second basemen, an outfielder who could play anywhere in the outfield and maybe even cover first base. In 1955, you saw this platooning style in the likes of Joe Collins, who split his duties primarily at first base but also in right field. Jerry Coleman, an infielder who spent his 42 games mainly at shortstop but also covered second base 12 times. But the predominant player that was used in 55, his rookie year, was Elston Howard. Howard broke the Yankee color barrier in 1955, 9 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier across the majors. Howard was an outfielder who played for the Kansas City Monarchs before the Yankees signed him. The Yankees saw he could have potential as a catcher and began giving him catching starts in the minors. In 1955, he only caught 9 games, but it makes sense. Yogi Berra was having an MVP season behind the plate, but Howard was also covering Irv Noren, played 61 games in left field. Along with the positional platoon players, the second way Stengel loved utilizing his platoon-style players was for matchup manipulation. This might seem like a given in today's era of sports. Coaches often will go to the bench to have a more favorable matchup of a lefty batter against a righty pitcher, righty batter against a lefty pitcher. Stengel was creating this now norm with players like Eddie Robinson. Of Robinson's 88 games played in 1955, 44 of them came off the bench to pinch hit. Joe Collins, also a left-handed batter, pinch hit 21 times in 1955. Bob Cerv and Elston Howard, both right-handed batters, often pinch hit and relieved the left-handed batting Irv Noren in left. Cerv pinch hit 36 times and Howard 22. These matchup manipulations often paid off for Stengel, at least enough that it became a staple of almost, if not every, major ball club today. Heading into spring training, there were question marks. Who would be their shortstop? How will the pitching rotation shape up, and who will round it out? Is there a permanent left fielder, or will Elston Howard in his sophomore season be taking more playing time and splitting duties with Irv Noren outright? Stengel definitely had his work cut out for him in finding the right combination to take the Yankees back to the top and redeem themselves for losing to dim bums the previous fall. This is where we will wrap up today's episode. We covered Who the Heck I Am, we flew through an almost too brief history of the Yankees in general, we hit on Larry McPhail's brief stint with the Yankees and George Weiss, the creator of the Yankee farm system that gave us players like Berra, Mantle, and Bauer, Whitey Ford, and too many others to list here. Next episode, I'll be diving into the team a bit more thoroughly. If the numbers that were thrown at you there at the end weren't necessarily your cup of tea, well then sorry about next time. I'm going to be breaking down each position to try and give more insight into the individual players, so hopefully by the end of next episode we will all know more than just Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, and the others I've mentioned today. I don't entirely know how I'm going to tackle spring training yet. I've thrown around the idea of breaking it up into 2 episodes. I've also thought about tackling it week by week like I intend to do for the regular season, so who knows exactly where we're going to end up next time. But until then, thanks for listening to the introductory episode of the Yankee Seasons Podcast. We'll see you next time.